Everyone passed me over like background noise, while my sister got compliments on her life, and for 30 years, I let them believe I was the failure they needed me to be. You know that feeling when you're at a dinner table and you realize you could literally vanish and nobody would notice until the bill came? That was my reality, a constant state of being humiliated and mocked by the very people who were supposed to love me most. I watched my sister, the golden child, get praised for every mediocre step while I was shamed into the shadows, a ghost in my own home. But what they didn't know, what I kept hidden behind a wall of lied smiles and quiet yes sirs, was that I was building an empire in the dark. I couldn't believe how easy it was to fool them, but the truth I'm about to reveal is more shocking than any of them could handle, because the real explosion isn't a loud argument. It's the silence of a door locking forever. They thought they had me figured out, but they were about to find out that being background noise gave me the perfect cover to plan my vengeance. This isn't just a story about family betrayal. It's a manual on how to take your life back when everyone else has already written you off. What happened next changed everything, and it all started with a single, accidental revelation that stripped away their masks and exposed the infidelity of their hearts. I'm Crystal Sterling, 34, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the human equivalent of background noise in my own home. While my sister Chloe was showered with praise for simply breathing, I was the one everyone looked past during every single holiday dinner. It's a classic case of family drama, where one child is the sun and the other is just a cold, distant moon. I learned to navigate life in the shadows, realizing early on that my self-worth couldn't depend on people who didn't even see me. Being backstabbed by silence is a different kind of pain. It's not a sudden blow, but a slow erosion of your spirit since childhood. My parents weren't monsters. They were just indifferent, which honestly feels a whole lot worse than being hated, because at least hate is a feeling. I watched them celebrate Chloe's mediocre grades while my straight A reports sat on the kitchen counter until I eventually threw them in the trash. You start to wonder if you're actually a ghost, haunting the hallways of a house that was never truly a home. There's a specific kind of family betrayal that happens when your existence is treated like a footnote in someone else's glamorous biography. I became an expert at fading into the wallpaper, rarely speaking unless spoken to, which, let's be honest, happened about as often as a solar eclipse. I wasn't looking for a standing ovation, I just wanted someone to ask how my day was without looking at their watch. It's funny how being ignored can actually become your greatest superpower if you know how to use it right. I grew up hearing about Chloe's dreams, Chloe's boyfriends, and Chloe's minor inconveniences, while my own life remained a locked book that nobody bothered to open. It's tough when you realize your dignity is being chipped away by the very people who were supposed to be your biggest cheerleaders and protectors. I stopped trying to compete for the spotlight because I realized the light was rigged to always shine on the golden child anyway. So I decided to build my own world, one where I didn't need their flickering candles to feel warm. You'd think after 3 decades of being the invisible girl, I'd be bitter or broken, but instead, I became focused and exceptionally dangerous in my silence. I couldn't believe how easy it was to hide an entire life right under their noses, because they simply weren't looking in my direction. I was a phantom in a designer dress, attending events where I was essentially a seat filler for the real members of the Sterling family. But little did they know, I was quietly sharpening my tools for a future they could never have imagined. The thing about being background noise is that you hear everything, every whisper, every secret, and every dismissive comment made when they think you've already left the room. I took all that shamed energy and channeled it into a private ambition that was growing larger than our family home in the suburbs of Chicago. I was playing a long game, and the board was already set, though my parents were still busy admiring Chloe's latest participation trophy. I was about to stop being a ghost and start becoming a force of nature, starting with my career. While they were busy worrying about Chloe's social life, I was quietly grinding in the high-stakes world of cybersecurity and cloud infrastructure. I wasn't just climbing a ladder, I was building one with equity, patents, and contracts where my name was buried in the fine print. I wasn't just an employee, I had licensing deals that turned every technical win into personal ownership. My self-worth began to skyrocket as I realized I was actually brilliant at something that had absolutely nothing to do with my family's approval. I climbed the corporate ladder with the stealth of a ninja, securing contracts and building software that would eventually become industry standards. No one in my family knew I had transitioned from a tech assistant to a chief technology officer with a salary that could buy their house 10 times over. I kept the truth tucked away like a winning lottery ticket, enjoying the irony of being treated like a failure while I was winning. There's a certain power in reclaiming your narrative without having to shout it from the rooftops or social media. My bank account grew, my influence expanded, and yet when I visited home, I was still the one asked to go grab the extra chairs from the garage. I didn't mind the humiliated feeling anymore because I knew my reality was a penthouse in downtown Seattle with a view of the skyline, not a dusty suburban basement. I was living a double life, a titan in the boardroom and a nobody in the living room, and I loved every second of the contrast. It was my own private form of karma, watching them underestimate a woman who was literally changing the world. I remember one specific night I closed a 7-figure deal over the phone while my mother was shouting from the kitchen about me being late for the roast. I just smiled, hung up the phone, and went downstairs to be ignored for another 3 hours while they discussed Chloe's new car. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the justice of knowing I had built something indestructible while they thought I was barely getting by. I was a silent multimillionaire in the making, and the invisibility they forced on me was now my greatest shield. People often ask why I didn't just tell them, why I didn't brag or throw my success in their faces to end the family drama once and for all. But you see, if you have to prove your value to someone, they've already decided you don't have any, and I wasn't looking for their validation. I was looking for dignity, and that's something you give yourself, not something you beg for at a dinner table filled with indifference. My success was a private sanctuary, a fortress of solitude that I had spent 15 years carefully constructing piece by piece. I had accumulated enough wealth to retire twice over before I even turned 32, all while my parents still sent me helpful links to entry-level job postings. I never corrected them. I just sent back a polite thank you and went back to managing my global portfolio of investments. It was a beautiful, twisted game of hide-and-seek where I was hiding in plain sight and they weren't even playing. However, every secret has an expiration date, and mine was about to be revealed in the most unexpected place imaginable. It all went down during my grandmother's 80th birthday bash, a massive affair held at a traditional country club in Virginia that smelled like old money and mothballs. I was sitting at the kids' table, even though I was 34, listening to Chloe complain about the stress of her 3rd European vacation this year. I was tired, a bit jet-lagged from a trip to Singapore, and honestly, my filter was starting to wear thin after the 4th glass of wine. When my aunt asked if I was still renting that little studio, I just blinked and let the words slip out. Actually, I moved, I said casually, swirling the ice in my glass while looking at the hideous floral centerpieces. I picked up a penthouse in downtown Seattle overlooking the park, floor-to-ceiling glass, private elevator, the works. It just made more sense for my commute to the office. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a steak knife, and for the first time in my life, every eye was on me. I couldn't believe how fast the atmosphere shifted from condescending pity to absolute jaw-dropping, shocking disbelief in under 5 seconds. My mother actually dropped her appetizer fork at the table, the silver clattering against the china like a gunshot in the quiet room. A penthouse? In the city? She stuttered, her eyes scanning me as if she were seeing a ghost that had suddenly started wearing Chanel. Chloe looked like she'd been backstabbed by reality itself, her face turning a very unflattering shade of pale as the spotlight finally drifted away from her. The truth was finally out in the open, and the invisible daughter had just revealed she was actually the most successful person in the room. Yes, it's quite nice for hosting, I continued, leaning back with a newfound sense of self-worth that felt better than any promotion I'd ever received. I mentioned the square footage and the neighborhood casually, watching my father's brain try to calculate the property taxes on a place like that. It wasn't a boast. It was a simple statement of fact that felt like a long overdue act of justice for every time I'd been ignored. The masks were starting to slip, and the background noise was suddenly the only sound anyone could hear. My grandmother, Nana Evelyn, was the only one smiling, her sharp eyes twinkling with a secret pride that made me realize she might have known all along. The rest of the family looked humiliated for having treated me like a charity case for over a decade, and the tension was delicious. I realized then that my invisibility hadn't been a lack of light, but a shadow I had chosen to cast until the timing was perfect for the big reveal. This wasn't just a dinner anymore. It was the opening scene of a massive shift in our family drama. The questions started pouring in like a broken dam. How much did it cost? What exactly do you do again? Why didn't you tell us sooner? I answered with a calm, practiced grace, enjoying the way they suddenly hung on every word as if I were delivering a sermon. My sister's usual chatter was silenced, replaced by a brooding look of vengeance that I knew all too well from our childhood. The invisible daughter was gone, replaced by a woman they didn't recognize, and the consequences of this revelation were about to change everything. The morning after the party, my phone started buzzing before I even had my first cup of coffee, and it wasn't the usual "how are you" texts. It was my mother, suddenly overflowing with pride and asking if I wanted to go for a spa day, something she hadn't suggested in 15 years. The betrayal felt immediate because I knew exactly what changed. It wasn't her heart, it was my net worth that was suddenly attractive. It's funny how family betrayal can look like a hug when there's a hidden agenda behind the embrace. Within a week, my father called me Kiddo, a nickname he usually reserved for Chloe, and mentioned a tiny business hiccup he was facing with his investments. He didn't ask for money directly yet, but the breadcrumbs were being dropped all over the conversation, like a trail leading to my bank account. I felt backstabbed by the realization that their love was a commodity, something that had to be bought rather than earned or freely given. My self-worth was being tested by people who were suddenly treating me like a human ATM with a pulse. Chloe was the worst, sending me links to designer bags and saying things like, "Since you're doing so well, maybe you could help your little sis out." The audacity was almost impressive, considering she hadn't called me on my birthday for the last 3 years because she was too busy. I felt shamed for them, watching them scramble to bridge a gap that they had spent decades widening through neglect and indifference. This wasn't a family reunion. It was a coordinated siege on my assets under the guise of making up for lost time. I played along for a bit, curious to see how far they would go with this sudden, suffocating performance of affection. I received more compliments in 10 days than I had in my entire life, each one feeling more hollow and lied about than the last. It was a masterclass in infidelity of the soul, where they were cheating on the very concept of family just to get a piece of the pie. The justice I thought I felt at the party was quickly turning into a cold realization that I was still invisible. They were just looking at the money behind me now. Every dinner invitation felt like a sales pitch, and every "I love you" felt like a down payment on a future favor they expected me to grant. I sat in my penthouse, looking at the city lights, feeling more alone than I did when I was being ignored because now I knew their presence was a lie. I was reclaiming my peace of mind, realizing that the attention I once craved was actually a toxic trap designed to drain me. I needed to know if there was even a shred of genuine emotion left in them, or if it was all just a transaction. My grandmother called me privately, her voice trembling slightly as she warned me to keep my guard up against the wolves in the living room. She was the only one who didn't ask for a dime, the only one who still saw the little girl who used to hide in the library to escape the noise. My mother hesitated once when the spa invite went unanswered. Not enough to stay, but enough to make the hollow effort hurt. Her warning was the final piece of the puzzle, confirming that the love I was receiving was just a mask for greed and payback for their own failures. I decided right then that I needed to run a little experiment to see who would stay when the fountain ran dry. I decided to start my experiment by quietly mentioning a legal complication at work that had temporarily frozen all my personal liquid accounts. I told them during a Sunday brunch, acting slightly distressed, saying I might even have to let the penthouse go if things didn't resolve quickly. I watched the smiles freeze on their faces, the warmth in the room dropping faster than a lead weight in the ocean. The family drama was about to enter a new phase, and I was holding the remote control to the entire show. For the first few days, they tried to maintain the facade, offering prayers and moral support, but the invitations for spa days and expensive dinners vanished instantly. I wasn't sending the help checks they expected, and the sudden silence from my sister's end was louder than any argument we'd ever had. I felt backstabbed by the speed of their retreat, but it was the truth I needed to see to finally set myself free. My dignity was worth more than their fake affection, and I was finally seeing the strings behind the puppets. Weeks went by, and my phone, which had been blowing up with love, became as quiet as it was back when I was the invisible child. I stayed available. I reached out to talk, but I didn't offer a single cent, and suddenly, everyone was too busy to meet up. It was the ultimate confirmation of betrayal. They weren't missing me, they were just mourning the loss of the lifestyle they thought I would fund. I could have left the room and taken the furniture with me, and they wouldn't have noticed as long as my bank account remained empty. When I told Chloe I couldn't co-sign for her new apartment because of my situation, she actually snapped and told me I was useless if I couldn't even help my own blood. That was the moment the self-worth I'd built over the years turned into a shield of pure steel, unyielding and unbreakable. I sat in my frozen penthouse, which was actually doing fine since my accounts weren't really frozen, and realized that I had finally outgrown the need for their poisoned version of love. The justice was in the clarity, the sharp, cold realization that I owed these people absolutely nothing. The golden child was throwing a tantrum because her silver platter was empty, and my parents were back to treating me like a ghost who had failed her haunting duties. I felt humiliated for ever thinking they might have changed, but I also felt a massive weight lifting off my shoulders. I was no longer the girl waiting for a crumb of attention. I was the woman who had the whole bakery and was deciding who got to taste the bread. The experiment was over, and the results were as devastating as they were expected. Christmas was approaching, and the usual grand family gathering was being discussed with a distinct lack of enthusiasm for my presence. I knew they were planning to exclude me again, back to the old ways, now that I wasn't the lucrative asset they hoped for. But I had one more move to make, a final confrontation that would ensure they never forgot the name Crystal Sterling again. I was going to show them that being invisible was a choice I was now making for myself, and I was closing the door behind me. I showed up to Christmas dinner uninvited, walking into the house with a calm that felt like the eye of a hurricane. They were all there, gathered around the tree, looking surprised and slightly annoyed that the bankrupt daughter had bothered to show up. I didn't bring gifts. I brought the truth, and I laid it out on the table next to the honey-glazed ham. I looked my parents in the eye and told them I knew about the conditional love and the testing and how they failed every single mark. "I'm not broke," I said, my voice steady and devoid of the anger they expected to see. "I just wanted to see if you loved me or my portfolio, and you made the answer very, very clear." The shocking silence returned, but this time it was heavy with the weight of their own guilt and the realization that they'd been caught. I watched my mother try to stammer an excuse, but I held up a hand, reclaiming my power in a house that had tried to bury it. This was my vengeance, and it didn't require a single raised voice or an ounce of drama. I told them that I was done being the background noise, and that from this moment on, I was officially opting out of the Sterling family circus. I saw Chloe's eyes flash with a mix of jealousy and revenge, but it didn't touch me anymore. I was already out the door in my mind. The family betrayal was complete, and I was leaving with my dignity intact, something they would never understand or possess. I walked out into the cold winter air, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the fireplace I just left. But the story didn't end at the front door. The same people who never asked what I did for a living suddenly felt confident enough to use my name for their own greed. I discovered through a business associate that my parents had tried to use my name and professional reputation to start a shell company to lure in investors. They were trying to profit off my hard-earned success even after I'd cut them off, a final desperate act of infidelity against my career. I felt backstabbed one last time, but this time I had the legal power to strike back with terrifying precision. I didn't call them to argue. I let my lawyers handle the talking, serving them with a cease and desist that carried enough legal firepower to make them panic. I shut down their fraudulent scheme before they could even cash a single check, protecting my name and my future with a cold, calculated efficiency. It was the ultimate payback, showing them that the girl they ignored was now the woman who could dismantle their world with a single signature. I was done playing games, and I was done being a victim of their toxic, parasitic greed. I moved to a new home, changed my number, and started a mentorship program for young women who grew up feeling just as invisible as I once did. I've built a new family, one made of choice and respect, not blood and obligation. And my life has never been quieter or more beautiful. I realize now that I was never actually invisible. I was just a masterpiece that they didn't have the eyes to appreciate. Justice isn't always a loud explosion. Sometimes it's just the sound of a door locking and the peace that follows. Now, I have to ask you, have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family, only to realize your silence was actually your greatest strength? Have you ever had to walk away from people who only saw your value when it was attached to a dollar sign? I want to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't hold back, because your justice starts the moment you speak your truth. Is it ever truly possible to forgive a family betrayal that goes this deep? Or is a clean break the only way to save your own self-worth? Let's get a real conversation going, because I know I'm not the only one who has had to reclaim their dignity from the ashes of a toxic home. If this story resonated with you, or if it gave you the spark you needed to start your own silent ascent, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. We're diving deep into the psychology of karma, revenge, and the power of walking away, and you won't want to miss the next revelation. Remember, being background noise just means you're the one who hears everything before you change the entire song. Stay sharp, stay silent, and I'll see you in the next one.